Sara had always believed that love was enough. She believed it when she was 23 years old, working as a nurse in a busy city hospital, wearing plain shoes and cheap coffee stains on her uniform. She believed it when Daniel Holt first walked into that hospital, not as a patient, but as a donor, cutting a check for a new pediatric wing with a smile that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. He was 31, already rich, already powerful, already the kind of man who made secretaries nervous and waiters extra careful. And yet, when he looked at Sara across that crowded hallway, something in him stopped. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He brought flowers once, which she politely refused because the other nurses were watching. He brought coffee instead, and she accepted that because she was tired and had 3 more hours on her shift. That was how it started, quietly, without much noise. He did not sweep her off her feet in the dramatic way people talk about. He simply stayed. He stayed until she got used to him, and then a little longer after that, until she realized one morning that she was looking for him when he was not there. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony that Daniel's mother had strong opinions about, but ultimately accepted. His family was old money and new ambition. They had a last name that carried weight in boardrooms and country clubs. Sara's family was a retired schoolteacher father and a mother who made extra income sewing wedding dresses for other people's children. The two worlds sat across from each other at the reception dinner and were polite in the way that people are when they do not quite understand each other, but are trying. Sara moved into Daniel's house, a large, glass-fronted home in a quiet suburb where every lawn looked like it had been measured with a ruler. She left her nursing job at Daniel's gentle suggestion. He said she did not need to work anymore. He said it like it was a gift. She took some time to realize it also meant she was now alone in that big house for most of the day, with no patients to check on, no colleagues to eat lunch with, and no reason to wear her sensible shoes. She told herself she would find something to do. She painted for a while, took a cooking class, started a garden that died by September. She was not unhappy, exactly. She was just quieter than she had been before. When she found out she was pregnant, and not just pregnant, but carrying twins, the entire house seemed to exhale. Daniel held the ultrasound photo for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked up at her with eyes that were glassy in a way she had never seen, and he said, "This is everything." She believed him. She had no reason not to. The pregnancy was not easy from the beginning. Sara was put on limited activity after her 12th week because of a cervical issue her doctor had flagged. She rested as she was told. She did everything the doctors said. She took her vitamins, attended every appointment, drank enough water, slept on her left side. Daniel was attentive in the early weeks. He came to appointments when he could, which was not always, because his company was in the middle of a large acquisition that kept him traveling. She understood. She did not complain. She read books about twin pregnancies and made lists of names and rearranged the nursery 3 times. Once because she changed her mind about the color and twice because she was anxious and needed something to do with her hands. At 24 weeks, she noticed something was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, and Daniel was in another city for meetings. She called her doctor, then called an ambulance herself when the doctor told her to come in immediately. She did not panic. She had been a nurse. She knew what to do, and she did it calmly, even when her hands were shaking. She was alone when she arrived at the hospital. She was alone when the doctors rushed around her. She called Daniel twice and left a message when he did not pick up. His assistant called her back 30 minutes later to say he was in a meeting and would call as soon as possible. He arrived 6 hours later. By then, it was already over. The twins, a boy and a girl, both so small they seemed impossible, had not survived. The doctors explained what had happened in careful, gentle language that Sara heard from somewhere far away, like the words were coming through water. She lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling and did not cry. She could not cry yet. The crying would come later, and when it did, it would come in waves so large they knocked her off her feet every time. Daniel stood at the foot of her bed. He did not hold her hand. He did not sit beside her. He stood there in his good suit with his phone in his hand, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It took her a moment to understand what it was. It was blame. He did not say it that night. He was too careful for that, and maybe too shocked. But over the next days and weeks, it came out in pieces. Small pieces at first. A comment about how she should have called him sooner. A question about whether she had been following the doctor's instructions carefully. A silence that sat between them at dinner like a third person at the table. Then the pieces got bigger. He said once, quietly, that maybe if she had not been alone so much, this would not have happened. She stared at him. She thought about all the times she had asked him to come to appointments, and he had sent his assistant instead. She did not say this. She was still deep inside her grief, and she did not have the energy to also fight. Her mother came to stay for 2 weeks. Daniel was polite to her mother but distant, and her mother noticed. At the airport when she was leaving, her mother held Sara's face in both hands and looked at her with that particular look that mothers have, the one that says everything without saying anything. Sara nodded once, so her mother would know she understood. She did not know yet what she would do with that understanding. The house felt different after the loss. The nursery door stayed closed. Sara could not go in, and Daniel never tried. It was like a room they had both agreed to forget existed, except that they could not forget, because forgetting is not something you choose. She went back to trying to fill her days. She signed up for a grief support group at the local community center. Women who had lost pregnancies or babies, who met on Wednesday evenings and drank bad coffee and talked in careful voices. It helped. Not immediately, and not completely, but it helped. Daniel did not go to any kind of counseling. She asked him once. He said he was fine. She looked at him for a long time after he said that, and decided she did not have the strength to argue. He was not fine. She could see that. But whatever he was carrying, he had chosen to carry it alone, and he had also chosen to put part of it on her, which was the thing she could not forgive, not yet, and maybe not ever. 3 months passed like that. The two of them living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, eating meals across from each other, talking about small things, what needed to be fixed in the house, what was on television, whether they needed more coffee. They did not talk about the twins. They did not use the names they had chosen. They did not talk about what was happening between them, which was a kind of slow, quiet collapse, like a building that looks fine from the outside but has been losing structure from the inside for a very long time. Sara started keeping a journal. She wrote things she could not say out loud. She wrote about the twins, about the names, about the feeling of those weeks when she had been growing 2 lives inside her and had felt, for the first time in a long time, completely purposeful. She wrote about Daniel and about the look on his face that night in the hospital. And she wrote one sentence that she underlined twice, which was simply, "I deserve better than silence and blame." She did not know yet what she was going to do with that sentence. But she had written it, and writing it was the beginning. The Wednesday grief group met in a room that smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaning spray. There were 8 women in total, and they sat in a circle of plastic chairs with their paper cups of bad coffee, and they talked. Some cried. Some did not. Sara mostly listened in the beginning, because she was still learning how to put her grief into sentences that other people could understand. But she kept coming back every week, because it was the one place where she did not have to pretend she was fine. It was in that circle that she met Priya. Priya was 41, a former architect who had lost a baby at 7 months and had since gone back to work at her firm. She had a directness about her that Sara found both startling and refreshing. After the 3rd meeting, Priya asked Sara if she wanted to get real coffee, not the bad kind from the urn, and Sara said yes. They sat in a cafe 2 blocks from the community center, and Priya asked her, without much build-up, what her husband was doing to support her. Sara looked at her coffee cup for a moment. Then she told the truth. She said he was not really doing much of anything. She said he had been blaming her, slowly and quietly, in the way that someone can blame you without ever using the exact word. Priya did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had seen this particular shape of pain before. "What are you doing to support yourself?" Priya asked. Sara did not have a ready answer for that. She said the journal, the group, the walks she sometimes took in the morning. Priya nodded. Then she said something that stayed with Sara for a long time after that conversation. She said, "At some point, you have to decide if you are healing inside this marriage or in spite of it." Sara drove home that evening thinking about that sentence. The house was lit up when she arrived. Daniel was home early, which was unusual. He was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of water, his jacket still on, his tie loosened, looking at nothing in particular. She asked if he had eaten. He said he was not hungry. She made herself something simple and ate it standing at the counter, and they were in the same room for 20 minutes without talking, which was its own kind of conversation. She had started to notice things more clearly now, small things she might have explained away before. She noticed that when his mother called on Sundays, Daniel never mentioned Sarah's grief group or her difficult days. He spoke in a light, easy tone. Everything is fine. Work is busy. Yes, the weather has been strange. She noticed that he had moved some of his clothes into the spare room closet, saying it was because he needed more space. But she was a woman who had always been good at reading the things people were not saying. She noticed that he had stopped asking how she was doing altogether. Not even the surface-level version of that question that had been his version of caring. One evening, she found a card at the back of a kitchen drawer. It was from his mother, sent after the loss, and it was addressed to Daniel only. Inside it said, "I'm so sorry, my darling. This must be so hard for you." She stared at that card for a long time. Then she put it back where she found it. His mother had not called Sarah, had not sent her anything, had not come to visit. The family that had sat across from her parents at the wedding reception, being polite, had returned to being exactly what they had been all along. She called her father that night. Her father was a quiet man who had spent 30 years teaching history to teenagers and had a gift for saying important things in very few words. She told him she was struggling. He said, "I know." She told him about the blame, about the silence, about the card. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Sarah, a man who loves you properly does not need to put his pain on top of yours." She wrote that down in her journal when she hung up the phone. Things shifted slightly when Daniel came home one night and, instead of his usual silence, sat across from her in the living room and said he thought they should see a couples counselor. She was surprised. She said yes before he finished the sentence, because she still wanted to believe that the version of him she had fallen in love with was still somewhere inside the man who had been looking at her like she was responsible for everything they had lost. They booked an appointment for the following Thursday. The counselor's name was Dr. Anna Reeves. She had a calm office with 2 chairs facing each other at a slight angle and a plant on the windowsill that looked genuinely healthy, which Sarah noticed and appreciated. Dr. Reeves asked each of them to describe what had happened in their own words, starting from the beginning. Daniel talked first. He described the pregnancy with a kind of clinical distance, as if narrating events that had happened to someone else. He used the word unfortunate twice. He said the loss had been very difficult for both of us. He did not mention that he had been in a meeting when his wife called him from an ambulance. He did not mention the questions, the silences, the careful pieces of blame. He spoke as a man describing a shared tragedy in which he had behaved reasonably. Sarah sat and listened. When it was her turn, she spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She was not angry in that room, not loudly. She was something quieter than angry, which was tired and clear-eyed. She said she had carried the pregnancy alone in many ways. She said she had gone to the hospital alone. She said that in the weeks after, she had felt not just grief, but also the weight of being blamed for something she had done everything in her power to prevent. She looked at the plan on the windowsill while she talked. She did not look at Daniel. Dr. Reeves gave them exercises for the week. She asked them to each write down one thing they needed from the other person. Daniel wrote his on a folded piece of paper that he left on Sarah's bedside table. It said, "I need you to stop acting like I was absent." She held that paper in her hands and read it several times. She thought about the 6 hours she had waited alone. She thought about the assistant who had called her back. She thought about the meetings and the acquisitions and the good suit. She set the paper down and did not respond to it that night. She wrote her own answer on a separate paper. It took her a long time. She crossed out several things. Eventually she wrote, "I need you to admit, just once, that none of this was my fault." She folded it and put it under his coffee cup in the morning before he woke up. When she came back to the kitchen an hour later, the paper was gone. He did not mention it. They went back to Dr. Reeves the following Thursday. The session was harder than the first one. Daniel said he felt like Sarah was keeping score. Sarah said she was not keeping score. She was keeping a record, which was different. A record was just the truth of what had happened, written down, so she would not forget it in the moments when she was tempted to excuse it. Dr. Reeves watched them both carefully and said, "It sounds like you are having 2 very different experiences of the same events." Daniel nodded like that was a fair summary. Sarah thought, "Yes, because we were in 2 different places when it happened, and only one of us has admitted that." Outside the office, walking to their separate cars, they had driven separately, without deciding to, which said something. Daniel stopped and looked at her across the parking lot. She stopped too. He looked like he was going to say something. She waited. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he got in his car and drove away. She stood in the parking lot for a moment longer. A wind came through and pushed her hair across her face. She thought about the sentence she had underlined in her journal, and she thought about what Priya had said about healing inside a marriage or in spite of it. And she thought about the fact that she had just watched her husband almost say something true and then decide not to. She walked to her car. She drove home the long way, past the hospital where she used to work, where she had once been someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why. She did not stop, but she slowed down a little, just to look. That night, she opened her journal and wrote for a long time. She wrote about the parking lot and the almost sentence. She wrote about Dr. Reeves and the folded notes. And then she wrote something she had not let herself write before. I think I already know how this ends. I just do not know if I am brave enough to let it. She closed the journal. She sat in the quiet of the kitchen. And outside, it started to rain. The rain did not stop for 3 days. Sara stood at the kitchen window each morning with her coffee and watched the garden she had tried and failed to grow, now just wet soil and the ghost of what might have been. She was thinking more clearly than she had in months. Something had shifted after that night in the parking lot. Watching Daniel almost tell the truth and then choose not to have done something to the last fragile thing she had been holding on to. Not broken it, exactly. More like shown her clearly, in full light, what it actually was. She called Priya on the second rainy morning and told her about the counseling sessions. Priya listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Sara had come to value most about her. When Sara finished, Priya said, "What does your body tell you when you walk into that house?" Sara thought about it honestly. She said, "Tired." Priya said, "That's your answer." Sara did not argue. She went to see Dr. Reeves alone, outside of the scheduled couple sessions. She called and made a separate appointment, and Dr. Reeves saw her on a Friday afternoon. Sara sat in the chair that had become familiar to her now and said she needed to think out loud about her marriage without Daniel in the room. Dr. Reeves said that was completely appropriate and leaned back slightly in a way that meant, "Go ahead, I'm listening." Sara talked for almost the entire hour. She talked about the beginning, the hospital hallway, the coffee, the quiet way Daniel had stayed until she got used to him. She talked about the pregnancy and the things she had felt growing inside her that had nothing to do with the twins, a kind of happiness she had not known she was capable of. She talked about the hospital room and the 6 hours and the suit and the expression on his face. She talked about the almost sentence in the parking lot. And then she said, very simply, "I don't think he is a bad man. I think he is a man who, when something terrible happened, looked for someone to carry the weight of it for him. And I was the only person in the room." Dr. Reeves asked her what she wanted, not what she thought she should want, or what would be easiest, or what her mother would advise. What she actually wanted. Sara was quiet for a long time. Then she said she wanted to feel like herself again. She wanted to wake up in the morning and not feel the weight of someone else's unspoken accusation pressing on her chest. She wanted to grieve her children. She always called them that, her children, not the pregnancy or what happened. She wanted to grieve them honestly, out in the open, with someone who was willing to stand beside her in it instead of across from her. "Does Daniel do that?" Dr. Reeves asked. Sara looked at her hands. "No," she said. "He has never once, in all these months, said their names." She had not noticed that until she said it out loud. She sat with it for a moment, the weight of it. Their names, the ones she had chosen, that she had written in her journal hundreds of times and whispered to herself on her morning walks, had never once come out of her husband's mouth. He had referred to the loss in every way except by the 2 small names that made it real. She understood then what that meant. It meant he had never fully let them in. And if he had never let them in, he could not grieve them honestly. And if he could not grieve them honestly, all that pain had to go somewhere. And it had gone to her. She thanked Dr. Reeves and drove home through streets that were finally drying out after the rain. She made a decision in the car, not dramatically, not with shaking hands or tears. She had done most of her crying already, in the dark of the bedroom on nights when Daniel was already asleep, facing away from her. She made the decision quietly, the way she did most things. She was going to ask Daniel for a separation. She waited until Sunday. She made breakfast, eggs and toast, the ordinary kind of Sunday morning, and she set it on the table and sat down across from him. He was reading something on his phone. She said his name, and he looked up. She said she thought they needed to separate for a while. She said it clearly, without a long lead-up, because she had learned over these months that Daniel responded to directness better than to anything that left him room to deflect. He put his phone down. He looked at her with an expression she had not expected, not anger, not defensiveness. He looked, for the first time in a very long time, like someone who was about to tell the truth. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know I blamed you. I know that's what I did." His voice was low, not apologetic exactly, but honest in a way that was almost painful to hear because it had taken so long to arrive. "I think I couldn't face what happened, and you were the only one there, so I made it about you." Sara did not cry. She felt something loosen in her chest, not in relief exactly, but in the way that a thing you have been waiting to hear finally losing the power of being unsaid. She nodded once. She said, "I know." And she meant it. She had known. She had always known. She just needed him to know that she knew. He asked if there was anything he could do. She said she thought they had both needed this conversation a long time ago, and having it now was important, but it did not change what she felt when she walked into the house, or the way the silence between them had become its own kind of weight. She said she did not hate him. She said she thought she would always care about him. But she also said she had spent the last several months trying to heal while also absorbing his unspoken blame, and she was too tired to keep doing both things at once. He did not try to talk her out of it. That surprised her, and she respected it. He sat with what she had said the way a person sits with something when they know it is true and there is nothing left to argue. He said he would move to the guest house at the back of the property for now, to give her space. She said that was fair. They finished breakfast without speaking much after that, but it was a different kind of silence, not the heavy, accusing kind they had been living in for months. It was the kind that comes after something has been said that needed to be said. Her mother came to visit the following week. Sara told her everything over 2 evenings at the kitchen table. Her mother held her hand at certain points and said very little, because she knew her daughter well enough to know that what Sara needed was not advice but witness. On the last night before she left, they sat outside in the garden, the one Sara had given up on, and her mother pointed to a corner of the soil where something small and green had pushed itself up without any help. "You didn't plant that," her mother said. "No," Sara said. "I think the birds brought the seeds." Her mother smiled. "Things grow when they're ready, not when we plan them." Sara thought about that for a long time after her mother left. She started volunteering at the same hospital where she had once worked, not as a nurse, because she had let her license lapse, but in the patient support program, sitting with people who were waiting for news about family members. She was good at it. She was good at sitting with people in uncertain moments, at knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. The other volunteers noticed and told her so. She did not tell them why she was so practiced at it. She and Daniel talked occasionally. He was still in the guest house. He had, in those weeks, started seeing his own therapist, which she was genuinely glad to hear. He called her one evening to tell her that his therapist had asked him to think about the things he had avoided since the loss, and that he had been given an exercise to say the twins' names out loud, once a day. He told her this over the phone in a voice that was careful and a little broken. Then he said them, both names, for the first time. She sat down on the kitchen floor when he said them. She did not mean to. Her legs just stopped holding her up. She pressed her back against the cabinet and listened to him say their names, and this time she did cry. Not the crashing waves of early grief, but something quieter, like the end of a long holding of breath. She thanked him when he was done. He said he was sorry. She said she believed him. She did not know what would happen next with her marriage. She had stopped trying to predict it. What she knew was that she had walked through a year of the worst loss she had ever known, and she had not disappeared. She had kept going to the group on Wednesday evenings, kept writing in the journal, kept taking morning walks past the hospital, kept sitting with people in waiting rooms, kept being the person she had always been, someone who knew what to do when things fell apart, who stayed calm when it counted, who held her own hand when no one else would. The nursery door was still closed, but one morning, a few weeks later, she opened it. Just barely. Just enough to let some light in. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she stepped inside and sat on the floor in a square of morning sun, and she said her children's names to the empty room, and she let herself feel everything. The love, the loss, the grief, and underneath all of it, something that had been growing quietly and without her permission, the slow, steady return of herself. She stayed in that room for almost an hour. And when she finally stood up and walked back out into the house, she left the door open behind her.